What Jos Verstappen did to Max will leave you speechless. A father's tough love. It's late afternoon in Italy. A 14-year-old Max Verstappen is sitting outside a gas station like a kid who just got grounded by the Fast and Furious franchise. Moments earlier, after a race that went worse than a Ferrari pit stop, his dad Jos had kicked him out of the van and driven off, like some kind of Dutch racing version of Home Alone. Max, stranded in a foreign country with nothing but fumes and frustration, sat there stunned, probably wondering if this counted as tough love or just abandonment with a racing theme. Sound wild? Oh, it happened. And it's just one of many jaw-dropping stories in the Verstappen family playbook. Because when it came to raising a future F1 champion, Jos Verstappen didn't just push the limits, he curb-stomped them with a race boot. What kind of parent just ditches their kid at an Italian gas station like it's a deleted scene from Fast and Furious Family Therapy? To get it, you've got to understand Jos Verstappen, the man, the myth, the guy who trained Max like he was prepping for racing Hunger Games. This is no heartwarming tale of bedtime stories and participation trophies. Nope, this is full-throttle parenting, fueled by rain-soaked training days, pit lane meltdowns, and the kind of tough love that makes Navy SEALs look like preschool teachers. The bond between Max and Jos, equal parts legendary and wait, is that legal? What Jos put Max through wasn't exactly textbook, but the result? A Formula One juggernaut. Buckle up, because once you hear what Jos did in the name of raising a champion, your jaw's gonna need its own helmet. Jos the Boss, a racer's unfulfilled dream. Before he was the hard-driving mentor to Max, Jos Verstappen was a racer himself, and a fierce one at that. In the mid-1990s, Jos earned the nickname Jos the Boss for his fearless driving. He was teammates with legends like Michael Schumacher, and even scored 2 podium finishes in 1994, back when no Dutch driver had ever won a Grand Prix. For a time, Jos was the most successful F1 driver ever to come out of the Netherlands, until Max surpassed him. But despite early promise, Jos's F1 career never fulfilled its potential. It had moments of brilliance but was marred by crashes and mechanical setbacks, with bad luck, including a terrifying pit lane fire in 1994, haunting his journey. By the early 2000s, Jos Verstappen's F1 career had fizzled out like a wet spark plug, no wins, just a highlight reel of near misses and mechanical heartbreak. The man basically did a grand tour of midfield teams and bowed out of the sport without that sweet, sweet Grand Prix victory he'd dreamed of. Brutal. But Jos wasn't about to let the Verstappen name fade quietly into the gravel trap. In 1997, he and his then-wife, karting champ Sophie Kumpen, had a son, Max. And that's when Jos made a silent vow. If I can't be champ, my kid's gonna get the trophy, the records, and probably his own Netflix documentary. Knowing just how cruel and cutthroat motorsport could be, Jos decided Max wasn't going to just learn to race. He was going to be forged in the fires of full-throttle intensity. Training began early, like could hold a steering wheel early. Jos didn't just push Max, he basically put him through a one-man Formula boot camp before the kid hit puberty. Max had racing in his blood. Not only had his father been an F1 driver, his mother Sophie was also a top karting racer who once competed against future F1 stars like Jenson Button. With those genetics, Max was born with speed in his veins. But raw talent would not be enough, not in Jos's eyes. To become a champion, Max would need an edge, a toughness that only relentless discipline could forge. Jos was determined to be the one to forge it. Racing from the cradle, Max's childhood in karts. Max's road to Formula One basically started before he could spell formula. According to Max, it wasn't Jos pushing him into racing, it was Tiny, Max begging for a go-kart at age 4 like most kids beg for a puppy. Jos said no, told him to wait until he was 6, because, that's the responsible age for high-speed motorsport. But Max wouldn't let it go. After months of relentless nagging and a bit of tag team pressure from his mom, Sophie, Jos finally caved and handed his 4.5-year-old a go-kart. What Max didn't realize? He wasn't just getting a cool toy. He was unknowingly signing up for Dad's ultra-hardcore racing academy. Because once Jos was in, he was in. There were no half measures, just fuel, fury, and training sessions that would make Rocky sweat. Picture this: tiny Max Verstappen, barely old enough to tie his shoes, tearing around kart tracks and racing overalls while other kids were still wobbling on tricycles. And who's chasing him around the paddock? Jos, doing the jobs of coach, mechanic, manager, and borderline drill sergeant, all while still juggling the tail end of his own F1 career. No elite training academy, no army of engineers, just a determined dad and a pint-sized speed demon, grinding it out like their garage was a Formula One boot camp. It wasn't glamorous, it was greasy, loud, and intense, and it worked. In those early years, the Verstappen's base of operations was not a fancy racetrack. It was a humble camper van crisscrossing Europe. Jos teamed up with his friend and fellow karting dad, Richard Pex, whose sons were also racers, and together they bought a camper van and hit the road. Nearly every weekend, they would drive for hours to races, often in the karting hotbed of Italy where competition was fiercest. We went everywhere together, Jos recalls. Max, Jos, and the Pex family crammed into that camper, chasing the racing dream. Max was the star of this little troupe. This traveling circus of karting became increasingly serious. Jos treated Max's karting career less like a hobby and more like a military campaign, only with more tire smoke and fewer medals. They set up their own racing operation from scratch, tuning engines themselves, hunting down the best equipment like it was the last PlayStation on Black Friday, and entering Max in every prestigious karting event they could possibly find. Fun. That was a luxury. The mission was clear: win or reload the spark plugs and try again. By the time Max was 7, he was already a nationally recognized karting prodigy, turning heads while still losing baby teeth. But Jos wasn't about to let the kid start coasting. Nope, complacency was the enemy. He even had a strategy for keeping Max hungry: psychological warfare. "My dad never said I was gonna be a champion," Max recalled. Instead, Jos would casually suggest he might end up driving a truck or a bus, because nothing motivates a future F1 star like being told they're one race away from becoming a public transit driver. In other words, nice job, kid. Now go faster or grab your bus pass. Extreme training methods. It would break some children. As Max graduated from kid karts to faster machines, Jos cranked the intensity up to 11. Because why settle for supportive parent when you can go full race dad mode? In the Verstappen household, winning wasn't just encouraged, it was required. Jos had a go-to mantra. Second place is just first loser. Inspirational? Maybe. Terrifying? Absolutely. He drilled that into Max's brain like it was the 10 Commandments carved into a carbon fiber tablet. Every race was do or die, no participation trophies allowed. And if Max fell short, Jos's disappointment arrived faster than a DRS overtake. Swift, sharp, and more cutting than team radio from an angry F1 driver. Forget hugs. This was high-performance parenting, and the pressure was real. Jos's training methods became the stuff of karting legend and occasional horror. He didn't just teach his son how to drive, he tried to harden Max's very soul for combat on the track. One area of obsession was overtaking. Jos didn't want Max to pass other kids on the straights. Too easy. He often outright forbade it. If Max lost time in an overtaking maneuver, I tried to explain how he could do it better. This went as far as forbidding him to attack on the straights or in places that seemed too easy, Jos admitted. "You are only allowed to attack here, here, and there," he'd tell young Max, pointing to the most challenging corners. Those were places other drivers wouldn't even attempt to pass. This might seem overkill, but it worked. After years of this, Max learned to overtake anywhere on track. It became one of his trademark skills in Formula One. Jos also believed in teaching through adversity. Rainy day at the circuit? Perfect. Jos would send Max out on slick tires meant for dry weather to drive in the pouring rain just to test his car control. Enzo Mucci, a driver coach who saw Max in his youth, witnessed such tactics and was stunned. "When you saw it, you thought he's embarrassingly hard on his son. It would break some children," Mucci said of Jos's regimen. By normal standards, a lot of what Jos did was extreme. Jos even devised unusual drills for mental toughness. In one instance, he made Max hold his hands in ice-cold water until they were numb, then immediately go out and drive. When Max complained of the pain as his fingers thawed, Jos barked, "Ah, shut up." The message was clear: tough it out. If Max could push through pain and discomfort, nothing on track would faze him.
Yeah. But then he was, I'm
wheel.
cold and things like that. And then when the fingers warm up then again, and that's very painful. And I said, "Oh, shut up, you're all."
From the outside, these methods looked harsh. Some onlookers whispered that Jos was too hard on his son, even abusive. Jos vehemently denies this. "There are people who say I'm a bad father because I abused my child. I never abused him," he insisted. "I raised him. I was hard on him. That was my plan." Many people cannot imagine what it takes to reach the absolute top level of a sport. In Jos's mind, everything he did, no matter how extreme, was part of a plan to toughen Max up for the ruthless world of elite racing. When winning wasn't enough, the Gasly incident. If you want a sense of just how sky-high Jos's expectations were, don't ask Max. Ask one of the poor souls who had to race against him as a kid. Enter Pierre Gasly, Max's longtime karting rival and current F1 frenum. Teammate, kind of. In one junior race in Spain, Gasly beat Max, leaving him in second place. Great day for Pierre, right? Not so much for the Verstappen pit tent. Jos lost it. And not in a quiet, disappointed dad sort of way. He lost his swahhead. Gasly later recalled, describing how Jos tore into Max with the kind of language that would make a sailor say, "Dude, chill. We're talking full-volume pit lane rage." Because in Jos's world, second place wasn't just a loss, it was a betrayal. For young Max, it wasn't just about winning. It was about avoiding a post-race lecture that could strip paint off a helmet. Jos even grabbed Max's helmet and threw it at him. In front of everyone, he shouted, "Go back to the tent. You can't even win one of your races." Gasly was taken aback. The pressure on Max was painfully obvious. To Jos, even a podium finish, if it wasn't the top step, was unacceptable. This wasn't an isolated incident. Jos's temper was notorious. If Max failed to win, especially due to a mistake, Jos's reaction could be volcanic. Sometimes it was a barrage of criticism, other times a chilling silent treatment that lasted for days. The gas station story was perhaps the most extreme example. Enraged by a mistake in a karting event, Jos pulled over and ordered 14-year-old Max out of the van, literally leaving him by the road in Italy. He eventually came back for Max, but then refused to speak to him for an entire week. That week of silence spoke volumes. Max learned that day that in his father's world, there was no room for excuses.
And I think still, to my dad's liking, getting all the way to Formula 1, I still didn't work hard enough in his eyes.
The emotional toll and the unbreakable bond. Growing up under such relentless pressure could have broken a lesser spirit. Max, however, seemed to grow tougher from it. He has always been mentally very strong, Jos said, reflecting on those years. "I know I'm not the easiest person. I demanded a lot from Max, but he was able to endure it all." Indeed, young Max endured an upbringing that others might find unbearable. Max himself admitted that as a kid, he sometimes wondered why his dad had to be so strict all the time. What was normal for him might have been traumatic for others, yet this was the only upbringing Max knew. In the end, it left him extraordinarily tough. And yet, through all the yelling and tough love, Max and Jos never lost their familial bond. If anything, it was tempered like steel. As Max grew older, he came to appreciate the method behind Jos's madness. By his late teens, Max could see that the gauntlet his father put him through had prepared him for anything. "Because of my training as a kid, what came later, F3, the first years in Formula 1, couldn't surprise me anymore," Max said. Stepping into F1 at 17, he felt fully at home in that high-pressure environment, largely because he'd essentially been in a high-pressure simulator his whole life. Today, Max speaks about his father with genuine respect and gratitude, no therapy sessions required. When asked if he appreciates Jos's all-in, borderline maniacal commitment, Max didn't hesitate. "Of course," he said, probably wondering how that was even a question. He knows Jos gave up everything: time, money, maybe even a few friendships after all those trackside meltdowns. "He did everything for me," Max says, and he means it, because under all the yelling, storming off, and high-octane parenting was a dad who would have driven through a wall, or at least yelled one down, to help his kid win. Turns out, behind every racing monster is a parent who packed the snacks, tuned the engine, and occasionally went nuclear in Parc Fermé. Over time, as Max climbed to the highest levels, Jos had to loosen his grip. When Max debuted in Formula 1 in 2015 at age 17, he was now part of a professional team. Jos had to step back and let Red Bull's bosses and engineers take charge. By the time Max was in his 20s, Jos acknowledged his son was old and wise enough to make his own decisions. Still, that transition wasn't easy for such a hands-on father. Jos could often be seen at races, nervously watching from the garage. His intense gaze became familiar to F1 fans. It was clear that even as an observer, Jos lived every lap with his son, a champion's genesis. In the end, it's about more than racing. It's about a father and son who dared to dream big and were willing to risk everything, even their relationship at times, to make that dream come true. It was extreme and controversial, but undeniably powerful. He was vilified by some as a tyrant, admired by others as a visionary. What Jos Verstappen did to Max will indeed leave you speechless, and it left Max Verstappen with the unshakable will to become a champion.